She stood in the rain holding pain inside silently, her soaked hair plastered against her pale face, her clothes clinging to her skin, and though the streets of New York bustled with hurried footsteps and umbrellas bobbing like restless waves, she felt invisible, as if the world had blurred her into the grayness of the storm, and maybe that was easier, for who would care to see the sorrow in a young woman's eyes? Who would pause to wonder why someone would let the rain swallow them whole? Instead of seeking shelter, but Emily stood there because the storm outside was the only thing loud enough to match the storm inside, and though the rain stung her cheeks like cold needles, it numbed the ache of tears she had been holding back for days, weeks, maybe years, the ache of losing everything that tethered her to hope, and as cars splashed water over her worn shoes and people muttered complaints about the weather, Emily's fingers tightened around a small crumpled paper bag she clutched to her chest, a bag holding her mother's necklace, the last piece of her family, a cheap silver chain with a tiny locket that held a faded photo of the two of them when she was only 10, back when life still had laughter and safety, and as thunder rolled above, Emily whispered words no one heard, "I don't know if I can keep going." To understand the depth of that whisper, one would need to know her journey, for Emily was not born broken, she was born into a small, bright world filled with crayons and bedtime stories, where her mother, a waitress working double shifts, still found time to sing her to sleep and tell her that no matter how hard life was, kindness was their inheritance, and though they never had money, they had each other, but life is cruel in its timing. Emily's father left when she was barely 5, and her mother, Maria, carried the weight of 2 parents alone, yet with resilience that shone in her tired smile, she shielded Emily from the harshness of poverty, and for a while, Emily believed that as long as love remained, they would be all right, but then came the sickness, the slow theft of her mother's health, the hospital visits, the bills that grew taller than their hopes, and the nights when Emily at 17 skipped meals so her mother could eat, until the day the hospital machine beeped flat and silence replaced the lullabies forever, leaving Emily alone in an apartment she could no longer afford, with grief louder than the city itself, and though neighbors pitied her, pity could not pay rent, so she drifted, first couch to couch, then street to street, her art supplies sold, her school abandoned, and each day she wore her grief like invisible armor, smiling when she had to, shrinking when she could, until the night came when she found herself under the storm, asking the sky why it had to take everything she loved. And it was there, at her lowest point, that a stranger appeared, an elderly man limping under an umbrella too small for his broad shoulders, his coat damp, his breath visible in the chill, and though dozens of others passed her by, only he stopped, tilting his head with gentle concern, his voice rough but kind as he asked, "Are you all right, dear?" A question so rare that Emily almost laughed, for who asks strangers that anymore, but instead of laughing, her lips trembled, and her silence answered for her, and the man, whose name she would later learn was George, saw in her eyes the same loneliness he once carried, the same despair that had once driven him to stand in the rain years ago after returning from a war that stole his friends and the wife he adored, leaving him to navigate decades of quiet grief, and though time had softened the sharpness of his wounds, he never forgot what it felt like to stand alone in the storm, and so, without demanding her story, he simply extended his umbrella and said, "Come, you'll catch your death out here," his words holding more warmth than the steaming cafes behind him, and for reasons Emily couldn't explain, she followed, her steps uncertain yet pulled forward by something softer than hope, and together they walked to a corner cafe where lights glowed amber against the dark, the windows fogged with laughter and steam, and when they stepped inside, the smell of coffee and bread embraced them like a forgotten memory of home, and George, with the ease of someone who had lived through long winters of the soul, ordered 2 hot chocolates without asking, because sometimes decisions are too heavy for the weary, and Emily watched him curiously, wondering why a stranger would care, until he said softly, "My daughter used to sit with me here before I lost her," his gaze dropping to the table, and Emily realized his kindness was not charity but remembrance, a way to honor love by passing it forward, and as the cups arrived, warm and rich, Emily wrapped her fingers around hers, the heat seeping into her bones, and for the first time in months, she felt something other than numbness, and though words caught in her throat, eventually she whispered fragments of her story, halting and tear-choked, and George listened without interruption, nodding, letting silence hold the weight. For he knew that sometimes what heals is not advice but presence, and as the hours slipped by, Emily found herself lighter, as if grief shared became grief halved, and when the cafe closed, George pressed a folded paper into her palm, whispering, "Don't give up, you're not alone," before limping back into the night, leaving Emily under the street lamp with the note clutched tightly, and when she unfolded it, she found not money but an address, a community shelter, and his signature, George. Volunteer, and though fear urged her to crumple it and walk away, something fragile inside told her to hold on, and the next morning, with nothing left to lose, she stood before the shelter, its walls painted with murals of hope, children's drawings taped to windows, and when she stepped inside, she discovered not just a bed and food, but people, real people who carried stories like hers, who welcomed her without judgment, who believed in her even when she could not, and for the first time, she felt a belonging that her grief had stolen, and slowly, day by day, she healed, painting again, tutoring children, serving meals, and in giving, she found herself again, her scars no longer weaknesses but maps of survival, and George, who often came by, became not a savior but a friend, a father figure she never knew she needed, and months later, as spring bloomed and the rain turned soft, Emily walked through the city, her shoulders no longer weighed down by silence, and when she saw a young girl standing alone in a storm, soaked, shivering, clutching a bag like it was her last hope, Emily's heart clenched with recognition, and without hesitation, she stepped forward, umbrella in hand, her voice steady, kind, carrying the echoes of the night her own life changed. "Are you all right, dear?" And in that simple question, the circle of compassion completed itself, proving that even in the darkest nights, a single act of kindness can ignite a chain of healing, that the storms of life may drench us but they cannot drown us if we carry each other, and that no one, no matter how invisible they feel standing in the rain, is ever truly forgotten, for love, once given, never disappears, it multiplies, passing from soul to soul like a flame that refuses to be extinguished, lighting the way home.